Despite increasing frustration among many citizens, authorities appear to be expanding pandemic lockdowns.
Yeah, they are, Yvonne. Beijing, for example, is basically under a form of lockdown at the moment, very similar to what people in Sydney and Melbourne were used to. So you are allowed to leave your apartment, you are allowed to go and buy some groceries, but everything's shut. The restaurants are shut, the cafes, the gyms, they're shut. Public transport suspended, and we're also seeing in some other cities that fences and barriers are starting to be reinstated. So even though the term lockdown is not being bandied about as much as it was previously, all sorts of other euphemistic terms, things like silent management or just control, they're now being used to control and restrict the movement of people in cities from Guangzhou in the south to Chongqing in the southwest, right up to Beijing in the north.
What are some of the stories we're hearing of citizens venting their anger and frustrations over these restrictions?
Well, there's a lot. We saw some pretty dramatic scenes from the central city of Zhengzhou this week at the Foxconn factory where they make the top of the line iPhone. That's partly a labour dispute, but it's linked to COVID-0 controls, angry workers at that facility clashing with police. There has been something today in China which has really caused a great deal of anger online. There was a fire in a building in the city of Urumqi, the capital of the far western Xinjiang region, and fire trucks were unable to get into the compound and get close to the building because it was under lockdown. There were fences blocking the way. 10 people died in that building fire. A lot of videos went around social media, and it has sparked tremendous anger online. I mean, you know, people just questioning why on earth do you have a policy where the fire brigade can't even get near a fire? To the point where this afternoon the Chinese government dropped some other very big news which was non-COVID related. This sort of pop star singer bloke called Chris Wu has been given 13 years in jail for rape. Now, he's not very well known outside of China. He's very famous in China. This is a huge story. Now, some people have been wondering, was the timing of this announcement a bit of a distraction from the Chinese government because of the level of anger that is being generated about this fire in Urumqi?
Bill, some desperate situations you described there. Are the citizens' complaints being heard? Do you get a sense that it's having an impact on what restrictions are being imposed and how the government's reacting?
No, not really. Today, for example, the Chinese state propagandist Hu Xijin, he's pretty famous in Chinese external propaganda circles. He was complaining about the situation in Urumqi. He's been complaining in recent days too online about the situation in his district in Beijing because he's basically locked down. Now, is he being ordered to go out there and complain just to allow people to kind of vent a bit through him? Who knows? It works in a mysterious way, the Chinese propaganda system. But the fact that in many cities across China, instead of a loosening, we're seeing a restoration of the really tight measures, albeit slightly tweaked, that we saw in, say, Shanghai earlier this year, that indicates that they're locking in pretty heavily to COVID-0. As they've been saying, the government has officially been saying that they must unswervingly stick to it. But at about 30,000 new daily cases across China, clearly it has shot up at a speed which Xi Jinping and the central government is uncomfortable with.
Well, residents say the curbs in some cities go beyond what the national government allows.
Yeah, so the national government, for example, was one of the measures they announced recently when they revised and tried to slightly ease the COVID-0 rules. One of them was that secondary contacts no longer can be rounded up and chucked in a mass quarantine centre. That only, first close contacts of someone who has COVID must be taken away and forcibly quarantined. They no longer want people who are sort of, contacts of contacts. And then there are other issues like people from low-risk areas shouldn't be subjected to lockdowns and coercive measures. But for example, in Urumqi, this fire which has caused such a stir today, according to state media, that building where the fire happened was in a low-risk zone. So people are saying, why on earth was it boarded up under a fence like a lockdown to the point where a fire engine couldn't even get in? As you can see, officials at the local level seem to be pretty skittish and not wanting to be the ones who are presiding over a mass outbreak. So we're not really seeing it loosening up at all, Yvonne.
A lot of questions to be answered too. Bill, meanwhile, Taiwan's midterm elections are being held tomorrow. They're usually focused on local issues, but the president's urging voters to use these elections to stand up to Beijing.
Yeah, she is, and it'll be a big question how well that goes down, because we're talking about city mayors and local councillors, district councillors and stuff like that. You know, they're campaigning normally on building new playgrounds and community funding grants and fixing roads. They're not the ones who have to deal with China. But just in the last couple of weeks, the ruling party here in Taiwan, the DPP, really flipped the script and started talking about the need to resist China and defend Taiwan, trying to double down on being seen as the party that is a lot more defensive of Taiwan's interests compared to the major opposition party, the KMT. So this is them trying to play to their strengths. The expectations here in Taiwan, though, is that the KMT will actually do a lot better in these local elections, and partly one of the reasons is because most people don't care about China at the local elections. It's not about how to deal with China. But I could be wrong. We'll see within about 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, whether or not the ruling party at the national level, the DPP, has done better than expected.
Bill Birtles in Taipei, thank you.
Thank you.